The sky over the human colony of Emer burned with violet fire as the Council fleet finished its bombardment. Fragments of rock and steel floated in orbit, glowing against the dark like embers drifting from a funeral pyre. To the alien admirals stationed on the flagship Valeth, it was another minor engagement completed. They stood in their observation deck, hands clasped behind their backs, voices languid, as if discussing a routine harvest. They fought longer than the last batch, one of the officers remarked, almost amused. Stubborn little mammals. Their weapons are still chemical-based. Do they not tire of throwing stones? Laughter rippled across the deck. Even the flag admiral allowed himself a thin smile. He was Kaldar, veteran of centuries of conquest, respected for victories, but dismissed for his persistent caution. His golden eyes narrowed as he studied the tactical hologram. The colony had indeed resisted, managing to destroy a Council corvette before succumbing. To his peers, this meant nothing. To Kaldar, it was another data point in a pattern he alone seemed willing to see. They adapt, he said, voice low. Each colony learns from the last. Their improvisation is concerning. Concerning, another admiral scoffed. Kaldar, they are a species that welds iron plates onto shuttles and calls them warships. Their idea of defense is enthusiasm. We should be grateful. They are a test for our cadets, nothing more. The debate was interrupted as the High Council's transmission materialized in the chamber. Dozens of alien dignitaries projected as shimmering figures, their voices overlapping in a chorus of arrogance. The message was clear: expand further. Humanity was not to be merely subdued but erased as an emerging rival. The Sol system, homeworld included, was to be incorporated into Council dominion. One dignitary chuckled. Take Earth. Leave them their moon if you must. Let them write songs about our mercy. The command was met with nods and murmurs of agreement. Kaldar's jaw tightened. He bowed, concealing the storm in his chest, and dismissed his officers. Only when the deck was empty did he allow himself to whisper, "You are not ready for what you invite." The fleet mobilized, engines blooming like stars. When they breached Sol's outer rim, their expectation was ritual. Another colony, another act of effortless domination. Instead, the void lit with lines of fire. At first, the alien captains thought it was debris or some crude mining array. Then the projectiles struck. Tungsten rods, accelerated to a fraction of light speed, pierced through hulls as though slicing parchment. One ship split in half before its crew could raise shields. Another crumpled like a dry leaf, its reactor blossoming into a silent nova. Within minutes, 5 warships lay in ruin. Confusion seized the Council fleet. Commanders shouted contradictory orders. They had never lost ships this quickly to such primitive foes. The weapons were not energy-based, not guided missiles, but mass-driven slugs, railguns on a scale no one had anticipated. They should not have been capable of such accuracy, yet every shot landed with surgical precision. Kaldar stood motionless as reports poured in. His officers stared at him, desperate for instruction. He only murmured, "They were waiting for us." Across the comms, silence stretched. No demands for surrender, no frantic pleas for mercy. Then, finally, a human voice broke through. Calm. Steady. Not triumphant, not desperate. You have crossed into Sol space. Leave, or you will not leave at all. The voice was chilling in its restraint. Not loud, not theatrical, merely factual, as though humanity were delivering a weather report. It was this composure that unsettled Kaldar more than the railguns. The humans believed every word they spoke. His second-in-command hissed, "They bluff. They must. Their colonies fall easily." Kaldar did not answer immediately. He thought of the colony on Emer, of the makeshift weapons that had managed to cripple a corvette. He thought of history, not theirs but the humans. Always clawing upward from disaster, reinventing themselves through catastrophe. And he thought of the quiet voice that had warned them without trembling. "This is no bluff," he said finally. The battle raged on. The aliens adapted with shields, but the humans adjusted their firing angles, anticipating defensive patterns. Orbital platforms revealed themselves from the dark, armored in ways crude, yet devastatingly effective. The Council fleet had expected terrified resistance. They had walked into a fortress. Kaldar ordered a partial retreat, ignoring the derision of his peers. Better to regroup and study this, he told them, though he knew most would call him coward. Yet the thought of pressing forward, of pushing toward the blue planet that hung in the distance, sent unease through even his hardened spirit. As the flagship withdrew to the edge of the system, he activated a private channel. The feed showed fragments of human history he had been collecting. Ancient wars, battles fought with bayonets, tanks, nuclear fire. He watched trenches filled with mud and blood, heard the static voices of soldiers who knew they would not return. He had studied 1,000 species across the galaxy, but none had catalogued its own suffering so diligently. None had learned so much from pain. A whisper escaped him before he could restrain it. They have never forgotten war. They carry it in their bones. The fleet limped back to Council territory. In the chambers of power, news of losses was softened with excuses. The humans had been lucky, the defenses temporary, the damage exaggerated. Leaders scoffed at the suggestion of real danger. Kaeldar stood alone at the edge of the council floor, his voice low, yet unwavering. You believe them weak, because they are young. But youth means hunger. Hunger means invention. They baited us at their borders. We walked into their jaws. And we are not prepared for the teeth that will close. The room erupted in laughter, in mockery, in accusations of paranoia. He endured it, though every word hammered at his patience. When at last he was dismissed, he bowed with ritual courtesy and departed. In his quarters, he replayed the human transmission again. That calm voice, stripped of bravado, echoed like a warning bell in his mind. Leave, or you will not leave at all. For the first time in centuries of conquest, Kaeldar felt something alien to himself. Not respect, not admiration. Something colder, something heavier. He felt fear. And somewhere beyond the dark expanse, the humans were waiting in silence. The Council's fleet returned to Sol with reinforcements 3 times the original strength, bristling with confidence forced over the cracks of doubt. Official proclamations declared the first encounter a fluke, a skirmish lost to chance. Officers laughed too loudly in the mess halls. Strategists barked too harshly in planning chambers. Beneath the bluster, unease festered. The humans had stood where they should have fallen, and no one could explain how. Kaeldar knew better. He kept his silence, watching the preparations unfold with a detachment that others mistook for indifference. In truth, he studied the patterns, human firing solutions, their uncanny precision, the way their defenses had unfolded like a trap already set. Nothing about it had been improvised. Every shot, every maneuver, had spoken of patience and design. When the fleet advanced again, the humans did not greet them with desperation. Instead, shapes emerged from the black, crude silhouettes of ships cobbled from steel and alloy, their hulls pitted and scarred as if dragged from scrapyards. The alien admiral scoffed. Decoys, one sneered. Their courage is admirable, their engineering pitiful. But then the scrap-hewn vessels moved as one, formation perfect, volleys synchronized. Shields flared in unexpected hues, catching plasma fire and dispersing it harmlessly. From beneath their ragged armor, concealed cannons slid into position. The first salvo tore through the vanguard of the Council fleet, ripping apart cruisers with disciplined efficiency. They've been hiding this, Kaeldar whispered as reports cascaded through his deck. This is not desperation. This is unveiling. A transmission cut across every channel, overriding jammers and command relays. A human voice again, different this time, yet carrying the same unshaken composure as before. This was never defense. This was the line. You should not have crossed it. The words spread like a toxin through the fleet. Officers who moments earlier mocked humanity now stared at their displays in silence. They felt the weight in the tone. Not a plea, not a boast, but a declaration of inevitability. Kaeldar's officers looked to him for answers. He offered none, only the truth that burned in his mind. They sacrificed their colonies. They wanted us confident, unwary. Every loss we inflicted bought them time to sharpen their blade. Back in Council space, panic began to creep into the chambers of power. Reports filtered in of simultaneous skirmishes across the frontier, human ships striking supply convoys, mining stations, and outposts with surgical precision. The colonies they had mocked as fragile had served as camouflage for a military force built in shadow. Some council leaders dismissed the threat, insisting the humans were burning their limited strength in a final act of defiance. Others, quieter but more perceptive, began to voice alarm. Kaeldar returned to his quarters with an unease that clung to him like smoke. He summoned his private archive once more. This time, he studied not only battles but faces, soldiers captured in black and white footage, their expressions hollow yet resolute, their voices recounting horrors with matter-of-fact clarity. He saw trenches stretching like scars across landscapes, skies aflame with bombs, cities reduced to rubble, and still humanity clawed forward. He understood then what his peers could not. Humans did not merely endure war. They cultivated it, memorized it, etched it into their culture and language. Their art and songs spoke of blood and fire, yet beneath it all there was a thread of grim pride, survival at any cost. An officer entered without permission, breaking his reverie. The young alien's face was pale, eyes darting. "Admiral, the Council requests your analysis for the Assembly. They believe you hold insight into these tactics." Kaeldar dismissed the officer with a curt gesture, but the request gnawed at him. For centuries, he had been tolerated, sometimes ridiculed, as a cautious strategist among glory seekers. Now suddenly they needed him. The irony tasted bitter. When he stood before the Council, their chamber vibrated with argument. Some demanded a campaign of annihilation, others proposed an immediate truce. Kaeldar raised his voice above the din. "You think them fragile because they are new to the stars. But youth does not mean weakness. It means hunger. Every war we have studied, they have studied also. Only they do not study from curiosity. They study because they lived it." He paused, letting silence draw taut around his words. What we faced was not luck. It was rehearsal. The Assembly erupted in disbelief, derision, outrage. Accusations of fear-mongering filled the chamber. Kaeldar bore it without flinching. He saw in their faces the same arrogance that had blinded them for centuries, and he knew it would lead them to ruin. As the session collapsed into bickering, a whisper reached him from one of the younger counselors. She leaned close, her voice trembling. "If you are right, Admiral, then we have already lost." Later, aboard his flagship, Kaeldar gazed out at the stars. In the distance, the human fleet maneuvered with unsettling coordination, never pursuing recklessly, never pressing advantage too greedily. It was the discipline of predators not yet hungry enough to waste energy. His second-in-command broke the silence. Why do they not celebrate their victories? Every other species revels in triumph. Why do they not? Kaeldar turned slowly. His voice was quiet, but the truth in it carried weight enough to still the entire bridge. Because this is not victory for them. It is continuation. They do not see us as opponents to conquer. They see us as a lesson, as practice. They are not fighting for pride nor territory. They are fighting because it is what they have always done, and they have learned to do it better than anyone else. The words left the crew uneasy, yet none dared challenge them. Outside, the human ships glided like shadows across the void, waiting, always waiting. For the first time, Kaeldar found himself wondering not how the Council would defeat humanity, but whether defeat had already been written into their fate the moment they mistook endurance for weakness. And in the silence that followed, he felt the dreadful certainty that the war had only just begun. The first coordinated human offensive struck, not with grand declarations, but with a silence that unsettled the most hardened Council veterans. Kaeldar stood on the observation deck of his flagship when the reports came. Outposts erased in precise intervals, convoys vanished between checkpoints, forward stations severed from supply chains. No massive fleets, no traditional sieges. Just shadows in the dark, and then nothing. When the survivors were questioned, their stories were fragmented but consistent. Small, fast human craft that appeared without warning, crippled larger ships with pinpoint strikes, and vanished before counterfire could land. There were no wasted shots, no reckless charges. Every action felt calculated, clinical. It was war stripped of spectacle, reduced to its most efficient form. Council commanders howled in frustration. To them, battle was a stage for honor, banners, and recorded glory. Humanity offered no such theater. They fought like accountants balancing ledgers, their currency measured in ruined hulls and silenced fleets. Kaeldar watched his peers debate with increasing desperation. One demanded overwhelming retaliation. Burn human colonies, scorch their planets until nothing remained. Another argued for negotiation, though his voice trembled with fear. The chamber erupted in jeers and venom. Kaeldar alone spoke with measured tone. "You misunderstand what we face. They do not value glory as we do. They have learned that glory is useless to the dead. To them, only survival matters, and survival is a weapon sharper than any blade." His words earned him ridicule, but beneath the laughter he saw eyes flicker with unease. Even the most arrogant were beginning to sense it. The Council was bleeding, and the humans were cutting deeper with every strike. Soon the first human fleets crossed the frontier, no longer confined to defense. Kaeldar's flagship intercepted intelligence reports of impossible movements. Ships appeared in two systems at once, as though distance itself had been deceived. At first the data was dismissed as error, but then came proof. Wreckage of Council patrols destroyed simultaneously across light years. The humans had mastered what the Council believed still theoretical, controlled wormholes. Not vast stable gates, but brief, tactical openings large enough for strike groups to slip through and vanish again. Entire battle doctrines unraveled overnight. Where once time and distance had given the Council comfort, now no outpost could be deemed safe. Kaeldar convened his officers in private. They watched the data in silence, lines of human movement weaving like threads through their territories. His second-in-command finally asked, voice hushed, what kind of species develops such a weapon only to use it so sparingly? Kaeldar answered without hesitation, one that does not wish to reveal the full measure of its hand. They are showing us enough to frighten, but not enough to understand. He paused, his voice softening with grim respect. They are not improvising. This is strategy generations in the making. As days bled into weeks, the Council's veneer of superiority cracked. On the floor of the Great Chamber, debates grew violent. Some called for the annihilation of Earth itself, send fleets with planet killers, erase the homeworld before the infection spread further. Others argued that such escalation would invite retaliation they could not predict. Kaeldar took the floor, his voice rising above the chaos. You do not comprehend. They do not fight for expansion. They fight because you gave them reason to. Every strike they deliver is precise, every sacrifice calculated. They are not desperate, they are disciplined. If you continue as you are, you will hand them victory piece by piece. But the Council would not listen. Pride was the mortar of their empire, and fear was a poison they could not admit to swallowing. They dismissed him as paranoid, a relic of an older age unfit for the glories of conquest. That night, Kaeldar returned to his quarters, heavy with the weight of inevitability. He called up another fragment of humanity's history. This time, he studied the strange ritual of their world wars, how they turned entire economies into engines of destruction, how they drafted generations and hurled them into fire without flinching. The footage was grainy, the voices aged, but the truth shone through. Humans had transformed war into an industry, their grief into fuel, their losses into lessons. He remembered the Council's mockery, the sneers at humanity's primitive weapons, the laughter at their colony's crude defenses. He saw now what those had truly been, masks, distractions, lures. Humanity had hidden its fangs behind a facade of weakness until the moment came to strike. His second-in-command found him hours later, eyes bloodshot from the endless reels of history. Admiral, the Council demands our presence at the next session. They plan to escalate. Kaeldar turned from a display, his expression unreadable. Escalate how? By sending everything. They want to crush the humans in one decisive blow. Kaeldar closed his eyes briefly, then opened them with the clarity of a man staring at a cliff edge. Then they will give the humans exactly what they want, a single point of failure, a target too tempting to ignore. The officer's silence was answer enough. When the next battle came, it unfolded just as Kaeldar predicted. The Council massed fleets in overwhelming numbers, banners unfurled, weapons charged for spectacle as much as destruction. And then, like wolves circling cattle, the humans struck, not head-on, but everywhere at once. Wormholes flickered open across the formation, disgorging precision strikes that carved through supply ships and command vessels. Kaeldar watched the chaos spread. The Council ships fought bravely, but bravery was no shield against mathematics. Every decision the humans made was cold, exacting, lethal. By the time the Council realized the trap, their lines had fractured, their logistics severed, their communications shattered. On his bridge, Kaeldar felt the last thread of hope snap. He did not rage, did not curse the fate that had delivered them here. He simply stared into the dark where human ships maneuvered with the patience of predators. His voice broke the silence, softer than a whisper, yet every soul aboard heard it. We have already lost. The Council does not see it yet, but I do. This war is no longer about who is stronger. It is about who understands survival. And he gestured to the void beyond the viewport. They understand it better than anyone. The crew exchanged fearful glances, but said nothing. There was nothing left to say. In that moment, Kaeldar's loyalty fractured. Not to his people, not to his fleet, but to the illusion that the Council's glory was eternal. He knew now that their arrogance had condemned them, and only those who adapted would endure. The reports of the shattered fleets poured in, each one a nail hammered deeper into the Empire's coffin. And still, the humans did not gloat, did not broadcast victory. They remained silent, advancing piece by piece, their calm more terrifying than any declaration. Kaeldar stood on the bridge, eyes fixed on the stars that no longer belonged to his kind. His crew waited for orders, but he offered none. For the first time in his long career, he had nothing left to command but the inevitability of collapse. And somewhere, he knew, the humans were already planning the next move. The Council's armada assembled one final time, a desperate wall of firepower stretched across the void. Hundreds of capital ships, thousands of escorts, all bristling with the pride of an empire that refused to acknowledge its twilight. From a distance, it was a magnificent sight. Rows of gleaming hulls, banners unfurled, weapons humming with charged energy. Yet beneath the splendor lay something more fragile than steel: fear. Kaeldar stood at the center of the flagship's command deck, his gaze unwavering as he absorbed the scene. He had fought in countless wars, seen fleets rise and crumble, but never had he felt such a hollow certainty. This was not an army poised for victory. It was a ritual, a desperate attempt to mass collapse with spectacle. His second-in-command approached, face taut with restrained dread. "They believe this will restore order, Admiral. That one decisive show of force will break the human spirit." Kaeldar's lips curved into something too bitter to be called a smile. "They mistake humans for themselves. We break when pride is wounded. They do not. They bend, they burn, and then they sharpen the ashes into blades." The battle began before speeches could be completed. No grand declarations came from humanity, no proclamations of destiny. The wormholes opened like black scars across the formation, and out poured the human fleets, not vast, not overwhelming in number, but precise. Each emergence struck like a scalpel, cutting command ships, crippling carriers, silencing communications. Railgun salvos cracked through the void, invisible until the instant of impact, tearing holes through hulls as though the universe itself had turned hostile. The Council fleets responded with fury. Plasma torrents lit the darkness, missile swarms filled the expanse, but their coordination faltered the moment their chains of command were severed. Admirals barked contradictory orders, and formations disintegrated under the weight of chaos. Kaeldar's bridge quaked as nearby vessels were reduced to fireballs. The crew looked to him, desperate for orders. For a long moment, he gave none, only watching the slow dismemberment of an empire that had once believed itself eternal. Finally, his voice broke through the din. "Hold your fire unless targeted directly. Save your strength. This storm is not meant for us." His officers hesitated, then obeyed, their relief tinged with shame. They wanted to fight, to prove themselves, but Kaeldar knew it was futile. Humanity was not simply winning, they were dismantling. Every strike was calculated not for maximum destruction, but maximum unraveling. Each shot eroded morale, as much as machinery. On the Council homeworld, the Assembly watched in horror as reports streamed in. Hours earlier they had been roaring with defiance, but now silence reigned. They could not reconcile what they saw, an empire that had never known defeat now bleeding into nothingness. Arguments sputtered into whispers, and whispers into prayers. The humans did not slow. Their fleets advanced deeper, opening wormholes not just into battlefields, but into industrial sectors, communication hubs, even the skies above Council worlds. They did not bombard cities, did not massacre civilians. They struck only where it mattered, crippling infrastructure and neutralizing military response. It was not conquest. It was control. On his flagship, Kaeldar finally understood the final shape of this war. Humanity was not here to annihilate. They were here to end the pretense of the Council's supremacy. And they were succeeding. As the fleet crumbled, Kaeldar opened a channel to his remaining captains. His voice was steady, even calm. "Stand down. There is no honor in feeding ourselves to their fire. Preserve your crews, your ships, your lives. The Council's glory is ash. Cling to it, and you will burn with it." Some obeyed immediately, others cursed him as a traitor. But one by one, ships powered down weapons and withdrew from the inferno. Not all, too many clung to pride, and were erased in moments, but enough that Kaeldar felt the faintest flicker of vindication. Then the human transmission came, blanketing every frequency, carried on waves that silenced all other noise. A single voice, calm as ever, resonated across the void. "We did not seek this war, but you forced it upon us. Leave now, or you will not leave at all." The words rippled through Kaeldar's chest with the weight of inevitability. They were not threats. They were truths, immutable as gravity. He bowed his head, knowing the council had never stood a chance, not because of human weapons, but because of human will. The battlefield dimmed as the last resistance flickered out. Wreckage drifted silently, glowing in places like dying stars. The humans did not cheer. They did not broadcast victory. Their fleets remained in disciplined formation, engines quiet, weapons still trained. It was a silence heavier than any celebration could have been. Kael'thar requested parley. To his astonishment, it was granted. He stood on the edge of a projection chamber where human commanders appeared as spectral figures. They wore no ornate armor, carried no banners, offered no smug satisfaction. They regarded him with the same steady calm as their transmissions, their voices unembellished by triumph. "We offer terms," one said simply. "Your empire will not be destroyed, but it will no longer rule. Those who surrender will be spared. Those who resist will cease to exist. You will govern, but under our oversight." Kael'thar bowed not out of subjugation, but out of recognition. "You have unmade what arrogance blinded us to. Perhaps this is justice." The humans did not respond. They had no need. Their silence was judgment enough. When Kael'thar returned to his ship, the crew met him with eyes wide, waiting for direction. He gave them only truth. "The Council's era is ended. We will live, but not as we were. Better to bend than break. Better to serve survival than worship ashes." In the weeks that followed, fragments of the Council surrendered, systems realigned under human oversight. Some resisted and were erased, but most, seeing the futility, bent to the new order. What had taken the Council centuries to build, humanity dismantled and remade in months. Kael'thar became what he had never expected, a liaison, a governor under the very species he had once sworn to destroy. To his surprise, there was no cruelty, no chains, only the quiet efficiency of a people who wasted nothing, not resources, not time, not lives. He found himself studying them not as enemies, but as a force history had birthed to sweep aside the stagnant. One night, standing alone on his flagship's observation deck, he looked out at the stars now governed by another species. For the first time in his long life, he felt something like hope tangled with fear. "They warned us," he whispered to the dark. "We thought them weak. But they are awake now, and the galaxy will never sleep again." And in that silence, Kael'thar knew the truth every surviving Council world would soon accept. Humanity had not merely won a war. They had ended an age. The stars themselves seemed to lean toward their will, and nothing, not pride, not history, not glory, could stand against them.